The topic today is inflammation, and not just eye roll inflammation. We hear about this all the time, but this presentation will help you understand inflammation more thoroughly, specifically the different phases of inflammation and where it could go wrong and why it might go wrong. And this is applicable to anyone and everyone who might be inflamed, because the differences in the way that the inflammatory process goes a large part in determining whether you heal from something or you develop chronic inflammation and autoimmunity or cancer or something like that. So understanding the phases of inflammation is key to potentially understanding where you are in your health challenge and why you might not be healing from your given challenge. So this study is from the Journal of Molecular Medicine, and the first line says, suppression of the immune system after the resolution of infection or inflammation is an important process that limits immune-mediated pathogenesis and autoimmunity. So what that says is that if someone's inflamed due to infection or due to inflammation from another cause, like say trauma or exposure to some toxin or something, the inflammation is the response by the immune system, and that's appropriate, right? We don't want an infection to persist. We don't want to leave tissue that's damaged. We don't want to leave that unaddressed. We want to clean that up so it doesn't become necrotic tissue. And so we should have inflammation. That's an appropriate response. Where it becomes inappropriate is if the inflammation stays too long or is too robust, or if the inflammation can't be mounted to a level high enough to clear infection or clear the damaged tissue. And when one of those situations occurs, then that could lead to pathology and or autoimmunity. And so the best way to go through this is to show you these graphics. And so the study lays it out in 3 graphics for us here. Graphic A is a normal immune response, and we'll start there. And so the y-axis is the magnitude of the response. The x-axis is the time. And so let me get a pointer here to best go through this for you. All right, so the yellow is the infection or the tissue damage. Okay, let's just say infection for ease of conversation. So the yellow is the infection. So at time 0, the person is infected, and the infection, say a virus, gains ground in the tissue and reproduces and reaches a peak at some point. Shortly after time 0, the green area is the pro-inflammatory immune response. Shortly after time 0, the body recognizes, the immune system recognizes that there's an infection on board and starts to mobilize and create a pro-inflammatory response in order to clear the infection. And then at an even later time, a different mechanism in the immune system, the pink color, ramps up. And the point of this part of the immune system is to resolve the inflammation and clear the damaged tissue, etc. So in a healthy, normal immune response to an infection, we have infection grab hold, pro-inflammatory immune response comes and kicks butt, takes names, and then the resolving phase of inflammation comes and resolves the inflammation, puts out the fires, restores healthy tissue, and it looks like there was never anything wrong. That's a healthy immune response. That's what we want to see when we're faced with infection, tissue damage, etc. Now, B is where the resolution isn't strong enough to put out the fire. So B will lead to chronic inflammation, high inflammation. Okay, so same thing, time A, we have an infection. Then we have a very robust pro-inflammatory immune response that kills the virus, okay? But our resolution phase isn't strong enough to put out the fire, the pro-inflammatory response. So now this person, yes, cleared the virus well, but is left with a pro-inflammatory response that may lead to self-tissue damage and perhaps lead to autoimmunity, or lead to pain due to chronic high inflammation, lead to pathology like that. So if you can't mount a pro-resolving response, you are now setting yourself on fire with high sustained inflammation. And even though the virus is gone, we're still damaging tissue because now we have an inappropriately high immune response. And then the other option is C here, where you see an infection occurs and a pro-inflammatory response occurs, but that response is too weak, so the infection persists. And the reason that that response is too weak is because the resolution phase is too strong. So the timing of the resolution phase was too early. If you look at this chart, it starts just about at time 0 with the other two, whereas these previous two charts, the resolution phase didn't come in until some amount of time after. So if we're starting a resolution phase too soon, we can't mount the appropriate pro-inflammatory response to get on top of the virus or the infection or the tissue damage or whatever it is. And so now the infection is allowed to persist, and chronic infection due to chronic immune suppression of our anti-infection defenses leads to chronic infection, which can promote autoimmune disease, potentially cancer, things that aren't good. So understanding the different phases of the immune response, the inflammatory response to infection, to trauma, to tissue damage, helps us understand why a person may or may not be experiencing symptoms, and helps us be able to test for, hey, is this person able to mount a typical immune response? Is this person chronically inflamed because they can't resolve inflammation? Is this person chronically infected because they can't mount an anti-inflammatory response? Now, what resolves inflammation? Good question. Anti-inflammatories. And one of the best anti-inflammatories we know are our fish oils, our omega-3 fatty acids. And back in the early 2000s, 2007, 2008, around there, researchers discovered pro-resolving lipid mediators, which is a fancy term for metabolites that come from our essential fatty acids like the EPA and DHA omega-3s. Those break down into pro-resolving mediators, and the pro-resolving mediators do what they say. Pro-resolving means they promote resolution of inflammation. So they promote the pink color. They promote putting the fire out, okay? So we need to have sufficient omega-3 fatty acid levels so that we have sufficient pro-resolving mediators like resolvins and protectants, so that we can put out fires and don't allow them to stay too long. And this is important in the immune system, and it's also important for lung health, kidney health, eye health, brain health, etc. If we look at a graph from this study, let's zoom in here. So we have omega-6s, which are pro-inflammatory, and we have omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory. And as a reminder, it's important to remember that omega-6s aren't bad and omega-3s aren't good. They're both essential. They're called essential fatty acids, right? Essential because our bodies can't make them, so they're required from the diet, and essential because we need both of them for our physiology to work appropriately. Omega-6s we need so we can start fires and deal with things that way. Omega-3s so we can put out fires. The problem is in the American diet, we are dominant in omega-6. So most people have a dominant omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which creates a net pro-inflammatory physiology and promotes cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, autoimmunity, pain, etc. Research in an ancestral health arena has looked at hunter-gatherers and looked at the typical omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in hunter-gatherers. And historically or ancestrally, the ratio is typically between 4 to 1, 6 to 3, and 1 to 1, 6 to 3. But in the typical American diet, it's up to 40 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. So if you're 40 to 1, you're promoting inflammation, or you could think of it as you're starting 40 fires for every one you're putting out. Well, what's that going to result in? Cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, autoimmunity, pain, all the things we see rampant in our society. So if we can reduce that ratio from 40 to 1 down to 4 to 1, we can do a lot to decrease inflammation, resolve inflammation, decrease risk of heart disease, cancer, dementia, stroke, autoimmunity, pain, etc. So back to pro-resolving mediators, what the scientists discovered is that omega-3s break down into different forms of resolvents, okay? EPA, which is the most anti-inflammatory parent omega-3, breaks down into E-series resolvents, and DHA, which is also an anti-inflammatory omega-3 and is key to brain health, breaks down into D-series resolvents and neuroprotectants. And so these are anti-inflammatory and pro-resolving, like we said. So when there's inflammation, this arrow here showing us initiation of inflammation, and over time there's resolution and return to tissue balance or homeostasis. And in order to do that, we need resolvents, pro-resolving mediators. So if you are deficient in omega-3s, then you're going to be deficient in pro-resolving mediators, and you're going to have a harder time putting fires out. So you're going to be more like the B scenario here, where you might be able to start fires and maybe kill bugs, but if you can't put those fires out, you're still inflamed and you're causing issues that way. So having sufficient omega-3 levels is key to resolving inflammation. And those astute viewers out there, and if this isn't you, it doesn't mean you're not astute, but there are viewers out there who might say, okay, I realize that NSAID medications block the COX pathways over here from omega-6. So NSAID drugs are anti-inflammatory by blocking omega-6. So aren't those pro-resolving by inhibiting the inflammation? And the answer to that is it depends. Research has found that if you take NSAIDs right away or early on in the inflammatory process, then they are helpful and can help put out fires. But if you take them too late in the process, they've actually been found to be what's called resolution toxic. So a medication that you think you're taking to get an anti-inflammatory benefit taken too late in the process actually is resolution toxic and making it harder for you to put out the fire counterintuitively. So, and that applies if you're taking them chronically too. So if you take them too late in the process or you take them for too long, they can be resolution toxic and be working against your goals. So a couple of things that the resolvins are good for that research shows us. Let's dive in here. So if we look at, scroll down. If you look at E-series resolvins, what do? In the skin, they reduce inflammation. In the GI cavity, in the peritoneum, they reduce inflammation. In the colon, they reduce inflammation. They improve survival in colitis. They reduce weight loss in colitis, reduce inflammation in the eye and in the mouth. That's the E-series resolvins. If you look at the D-series resolvins, same thing, reducing inflammation, protecting the kidney from ischemic injury, reduces eye injury when there's vascular issues. And then the protectin D1, again, reduces inflammation. In regards to stroke, it limits stroke damage and inflammatory entry into the brain. So research has shown that the healthier your omega-3 levels entering a head injury or entering a brain injury, the better the outcome on the other side. So we don't want to wait necessarily to take these things until we've already had the injury. We want to be sufficient ahead of time. You know, prophylactically optimal levels will protect us from worse damage when and if we sustain an injury. Protectin D1 protects the retina in Alzheimer's disease. It promotes brain survival. Okay, so lots of help with eyes, kidneys, lungs. So again, wrapping it up, we want to have optimal levels of omega-3 fatty acids so that we have optimal levels of pro-resolving mediators, and we can have optimal anti-inflammatory response and resolution of inflammation so that we can be an A over here and not a B or a C. Let's open it up for questions.
I have a question. There's EPA and DHA, and I think you said DHA was more on the brain health side.
Yep.
And the EPA is more for like pain or such.
Yep.
So and are both of those also in krill oil?
They are, but krill oil is very next to fish oil, it's very weak. So
Okay.
krill oil has, you know, excellent marketing, but if you take a bottle of krill oil and a bottle of fish oil and you compare the amounts of EPA and DHA in both of them and the total amount of omega-3s in both of them, the krill oil is woefully inadequate. And actually in that, in the supplements video I did a few weeks ago that I emailed you, I actually cover that and go and do side by side with products for you there.
Did you?
So
Well, I
yeah,
haven't looked at that yet, but
so,
did you have recommendations? Because the company I use, Nordic Naturals, has all these different formulas.
Mhm.
And they tell you how much EPA and how much DHA, and I
Yep.
never know what to pick.
Yeah, so in nature, it's the best ratio is 3-2, which is harder math than 2-1, but 3-2 EPA to DHA. When in doubt, for easy math, just go for 2-1. But you want
More EPA.
more EPA, yep. And so you could shoot for, you know, you can just get a general fish oil that has them both, and ideally it'd have DPA and GLA in it as well, if you want an alphabet soup of things to look for. But you want them all, right? If someone's got a lot of, say, pain and inflammation, they might want a more EPA focused version. If someone's got more neurologic symptoms, they might want more of a DHA. But long term, you still want the balance. So you don't necessarily want to take high dose DHA long term, like set it and forget it, because you could skew the ratios ultimately there. So, you know, a general fish oil looking to get, say, about 3,000 milligrams a day, which is 3 grams combined, is a good baseline to shoot for. And then depending on what's going on, you could, you know, titrate up or down